Back in 2021, I decided I wanted to get my hands on a PS4 since I had been interested in some of the exclusive games like Insomniac's Spider-Man and Persona 5 Royal. I had my fun with those games, and I put tons of hours into them, but once I was finished with those games, I wanted to try out some other exclusive titles. Of course, I played some of the popular exclusives like Horizon Zero Dawn and The Last of Us, but then I snagged a copy of Ghost of Tsushima, and I fell in love with it. I loved the story, the gameplay, the atmosphere, the music. Everything about that game was so unique and interesting, I couldn't help getting absorbed into its world. Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games of all time, so when I heard a sequel was coming, I was looking forward to it. I couldn't wait to see the new open world and new content, so when October 2nd rolled around, I got my hands on a copy as soon as possible. Just like Ghost of Tsushima, I fell in love with this game. The world was so detailed and expansive, the new bounty feature added even more content to the game, and the combat mechanics were just as fun as the first game. I know I usually save this for the end of the video, but I need to say it now. Ghost of Yotei is a masterpiece to me. It gives us more of what worked well in Tsushima, and I won't complain about that. This game may not have reinvented the wheel like Tsushima did, but it added tons of polish and new features to make this a worthwhile sequel. Anyways, with all my praise and gushing out of the way, let's take a closer look at Ghost of Yotei. Before I get started with the story, I will admit it's not as good as Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima had such a unique and tragic narrative that I think it would be really hard for a sequel to follow it up with something that hits those same highs. However, that doesn't mean Ghost of Yotei's story is lacking, quite the opposite in fact. This game does indulge in some cliches and a little bit of cheesiness, but that doesn't take away from the story it's trying to tell. Ghost of Yotei sets out to tell a tale of revenge, somewhat similar to something like John Wick or Kill Bill. While the main character Atsu and her brother Jubei are out collecting mushrooms, they come across a samurai named Saito. After they bring Saito back to their home, Saito recognizes their father. Atsu's father used to be part of Saito's clan, but then abandoned them because Saito was becoming too cruel and evil. Driven by petty revenge, Saito and the Yotei 6 kill Atsu's parents, then pin her to a burning tree. Atsu is able to escape, travels to the south to become a mercenary, then returns to Ezo 16 years later to kill the Yotei 6 and avenge her family. The concept may not be all that original, but the game does a good job of getting you invested in Atsu as a character and her motivations for revenge. I won't go over everything in the story, since I think it works best when you go into it blind. However, I will pick out some specific points that I wanted to talk about. When you get started with Ghost of Yotei, you'll notice that this game hits the ground running. This game starts out strong and builds its narrative elements really quickly. Within the first 30 minutes, you'll already have killed one of the members of the Yotei 6 and earned the title of the Ghost. Whether you think this is good or not is a little subjective. Some people may be perfectly okay with the faster pace of the intro, while others might have preferred the game take its time setting up its story. Personally, I would have preferred if the game took a little bit more time to establish its setting and characters. However, I won't complain about the game trying to get us to the good stuff as soon as it can. The intro to the game also has one of my favorite cutscenes in this campaign.
I'm looking for some old friends. The Yotei 6.
Show her the door.
Things like this just make the story a little bit more cheesy, and honestly, I'm all for it. This game definitely leans a little bit further into those classic samurai movies, and it adds its own charm and uniqueness to Ghost of Yotei. Not only that, but this game also leans into some of those classic revenge movie tropes. Skipping ahead to the Kitsune part of the game, it turns out that the original Kitsune was actually kicked out of the Yotei 6 sometime after Atsu's parents were killed. We also learned that the person helping us track down the new Kitsune, Oyuki, was actually the original Kitsune. At first, Atsu didn't care if Oyuki was trying to atone. She was still focused on killing every member of the Yotei 6. But after Oyuki trains Atsu to take down the new Kitsune, Atsu learns to forgive Oyuki and lets her become one of her closest allies. I don't know if anyone will agree with me on this, but it kind of reminds me of the ending of Spider-Man 3, where Peter ends up forgiving Sandman. Like I said before, it may not be the most original, but I think it's effective. I could also say a similar thing about the ending for this game. At first, Atsu is driven purely by revenge. Nothing else around her even matters when the opportunity to kill one of the Yotei 6 is present. We actually see that play out when Atsu's brother, Jubei, needs help defending his clan's castle. While the dragon and the spider raid Matsumai Castle, Atsu has the opportunity to kill the dragon, and of course, she pursues him instead of helping fight with her brother. While she may have been successful in defeating the dragon, Saito ends up capturing Jubei and Oyuki. Once this happens, we see a shift in Atsu as a character. She's not driven by revenge anymore. She sees that her pursuit to kill the Yotei 6 puts people in danger, and decides that being with her family is more important. Like I said before, we've seen these kinds of story beats happen in other movies and shows, but I was still invested in Atsu as a character and thought they were well done. Overall, I really enjoyed this game's themes of redemption and atonement. Not only do we see it with Oyuki and Atsu, but we also see it with other side characters and villains. Something else I picked up on was that it almost felt like each battle with the Yotei 6 was supposed to be a reflection of Atsu and her personality. When you're trying to defeat the Oni, it has these underlying themes of pure rage and aggression. Atsu is dead set on killing the Oni and takes whatever chance she gets. She sneaks into his castle, tries to get recruited as an Oni, and even uses Jubei as bait. She is constantly pushing forward to get to the Oni at any chance she gets, and it really shows how deep this idea of revenge is burned into her. Then with the Kitsune, we see more themes about forgiveness. Oyuki is trying to atone for being the Kitsune by helping Atsu defeat the new one. During this arc, we hear about how Oyuki feels like she can never truly be the same again after what she's done, but is trying to move forward and be a better person. Then when we look at the spider and the dragon, it has these feelings of guilt. Sure, Atsu was able to kill the dragon, but then she ignored her brother who was in need, which led to him being captured. We then see Atsu feel regret and shame for killing the dragon, and only wanting to rescue her brother and move on from her revenge. It adds this extra layer of complexity to the story, on top of the game's other themes. Another thing I'd like to add is how I actually really liked how Atsu was able to step away from being the ghost. In Ghost of Tsushima, Jin isn't able to go back to being a lord. He's stuck as the ghost for the rest of his life. Atsu, on the other hand, was able to lay down the persona and move on from it. It's not super important to the story, but I thought it was a nice change. Moving away from my more positive thoughts on the story, I do have a couple criticisms. For those who don't know, Ghost of Yotei is a little less linear than most other games. Rather than being assigned point A to point B like other games, Act 1 lets you kill the Kitsune, the Oni, or raid one of Saito's fortresses in any order you want. Admittedly, this is a cool idea. Letting the player progress in any way they want is something I'll always appreciate. However, since you can go in any order you want, Atsu isn't able to grow as much as I would have liked. Since there's no set direction on how Act 1 is supposed to go, Atsu has to stay a little stagnant to make sure the player isn't confused or left out of the loop. Is it really that big of a deal? No, not really, since Atsu starts to grow and change a bit more during Act 2, but it still is a little unfortunate that she has to stay somewhat similar for the first few hours. I also felt like the Kitsune and Oni missions overstayed their welcome a little bit. It seemed like right when you were about to have your final battle with them, they would escape and you would have to track them down all over again. The Kitsune missions didn't have this issue nearly as bad, but it still felt like it took a tad bit too long. I think if those missions shaved off an hour of them, they would have been a better length, but that could definitely just be a me thing. Something else I noticed was how it seemed like a lot of the side characters were really eager to help you. In Ghost of Tsushima, you had to prove yourself to pretty much every ally you had. They weren't just going to give up their items, you had to work for them. But in Ghost of Yotei, most characters are more than happy to help you out when you first meet them. Of course, there are some characters like Hana and Hanebe that make you work for their rewards, but others usually hand them over fairly quickly. In the grand scheme of things, it's not really that big of an issue, but it did feel a little strange getting new gear with almost no pushback. Even though I did have some issues with the story, I still thought it was really enjoyable. It may not have been as deep or tragic as Ghost of Tsushima's story, but I think it's still a really good narrative. It has some really unique and fresh takes on classic story beats, and I think it all works very well. Speaking of things that work well, let's get into the gameplay of Ghost of Yotei. If you already finished Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei should feel very familiar to you. As I played through Ghost of Yotei, I realized patience is really important in most fights. You can rush in and be really aggressive, but I found that the flow of combat works best when you focus on dodging and counterattacking. Things like dodge rolling and parrying feel really satisfying to pull off, and are really important to learn in most fights. Something else you'll notice is that different enemies and boss fights have different attack patterns. Something like this isn't too crazy, but I feel like it keeps the encounters more fresh since you'll be fighting a lot of enemies. Just like Ghost of Tsushima, each enemy will have a different weapon that they're weak to. Brute enemies are beat by the Odachi, enemies with spears are beat by the dual swords, just to name a couple of examples. I honestly really like having different kinds of weapons. Not only is it just fun to use them, but it lets you create whatever kind of playstyle you think is enjoyable. Even if some weapons are better against certain enemies, you can still use whatever weapon you want, so it's nice that the game allows that kind of freedom. You'll also have access to some other tools like blinding powder and smoke bombs. These items aren't crazy necessary, but they are nice to have, especially during stealth. Moving on to some other features, this game has tons of charms and armor for you to unlock. Charms let you have some extra bonuses like increased healing or better stealth. These can also help you either cover up some spots that your armor is lacking in or boost those perks your armor already has. The charms aren't too crazy, but they help you have whatever kind of playstyle you think is fun. Armor works in a very similar way. One armor is more geared towards projectiles in your bow, while another armor is better for stealth. I know a concept like this is fairly common, but still, I think it's pretty cool. If we take a step back and look at the open world, oh man, does it offer a lot. Ghost of Yotei's world is beautiful. I think most people would have a hard time denying that. All the different areas of this world have something new for your eyes to feast upon. If you're in the mood for a lush plain, Yotei Grasslands has you covered. If you're into more of a snowy landscape, then Teshio Ridge will provide. This world has so much variety and attention to detail that it'll be hard not to appreciate it. I remember a few days ago I was exploring a waterfall, and for a few moments I genuinely felt like I could smell water in the air. That's how immersive it is. Other games like Spider-Man 2 and Horizon Forbidden West also have really engaging worlds, but Ghost of Yotei is on a whole other level. Not only that, but this game has tons of content to offer. There are senseis who will teach you new weapon techniques, bounties, which are new, and wolves' dens, just to name a few examples. In addition to all that, we also have some returning content like hot springs, collectible sword kits, and random encounters from the Ninetales or Saito Samurai. This game is just filled to the brim with content, so you'll be busy for a good while. I also appreciate how natural it feels to find this stuff too. Sometimes when you pass by a village, you'll hear a rumor that will lead you to a side quest. Another time, a golden bird will bring you to a hot spring, and most times you'll just randomly discover something like sword kits or dyers. All of this just makes the world feel lived in and natural, and I think most people will be able to get absorbed into it. One extra feature I honestly really love is Watanabe mode. With Watanabe mode, it plays some lo-fi in the background while you're exploring Ezo. It's nothing too crazy, but it fits surprisingly well with the game's atmosphere. So far, I've put about 30 hours into Ghost of Yotei, and I've barely scratched the surface of what this game has to offer, so I think other people will be able to find a lot of enjoyment in the content this game has. Ghost of Yotei is an extremely well-crafted experience. If you played Ghost of Tsushima, Yotei may not blow your mind as much as Tsushima did, but this game is still a worthwhile sequel. Not only does it refine parts of Tsushima, but it adds its own flavor to the formula. The story is enjoyable, the world is addictive to explore, and there's tons of content to keep you interested. This game may have some flaws, but I still think it gets everything right. I know this game hasn't been out for very long, but I don't hesitate at all when I say Ghost of Yotei is truly a masterpiece. Okay, I'm gonna keep today's post-video yap session a little bit short because I honestly don't really have all that much to say, so I'm gonna keep it fairly brief. Apologies that my past couple of videos haven't been what I usually do. Full transparency, I wasn't really in the mood to make a video like I usually do, so that's kind of why I did the videos like, the Switch 2 video, my thoughts on the Switch 2, and the September Nintendo Direct. Those were just kind of what I felt like was a bit easier and more just kind of what I felt like making at the moment. So if you were looking for the videos like I usually do, like my reviews and stuff, I do apologize. We were in a bit of a drought there. I also didn't really have it in me to make another 25 or 30-minute review like I usually do. So that's why this one was a bit shorter, because those half-hour videos that I make, those take a while. And I didn't exactly have it in me at the moment to make another 30-minute video, so I thought doing this one was about 15 minutes, I think, so this was just a bit easier and a bit more just like what I felt like I could do, so that's why this one was a bit shorter. Anyways, that's about it. I don't really have anything else to say. I know I usually yap for a little bit longer, but this is all I got. It's all I wanted to say, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I hope you all are having a wonderful rest of your day. I love you, and I will see you all later. Make sure you stay hydrated.